So, after using Prisma for many years, I recently decided that it's finally time to try out a new ORM. And you know what? There are a lot of ORMs to choose from. You have TypeORM, Sequelize, MikroORM, Knex, which is a query builder, and then there's Drizzle. After scrolling through the Drizzle website and seeing how many people absolutely hate it, I knew I had to give it a try. And honestly, there are things that I absolutely love and things that I hate. So, is Drizzle actually better than Prisma? Well, that's a good question. Let's take a look. Let's start by first of all answering the question, what even is an ORM and why do we need one? So, where do you store your data? Probably in a database, in a relational database. What does a relational database have? Well, it has tables with columns and rows. When accessing this data, we create select statements using SQL. Right here I created a demo one. So I select the ID, name, email and a few other things from the user's table where the ID is 20. This then gets my data and then I can use it. But what's the problem with this SQL statement? So first of all, I am a TypeScript developer. This means with TypeScript I get types and also auto-completion. If I now misspell right here users, I won't get any compile time errors. Secondly, this is a declarative way of writing code. I'm not used to that. I follow the principles of object-oriented programming. So what is if I could get data from my database while writing TypeScript code? Well, this won't work because databases, relational databases, only work with SQL. So we probably need some sort of translator in the middle which can translate my JavaScript, my TypeScript code to SQL. And that's where an ORM comes into play. An ORM in simple terms is pretty much just a translator for your TypeScript, Java, Swift, whatever code, and it translates this code into SQL. Wow! Of course, sometimes an ORM also offers other features like an editor in Studio and other things, but generally the only thing it does is translate your code into SQL. But now you might say, hey Jan, if the role of an ORM is so simple, why do we need so many ORMs? Why do we have Drizzle, Prisma, TypeORM, Sequelize? What's the difference? Well, the main difference is abstraction. What do I mean with that? Well, let me show it to you. So here I have created a schema and the schema is super simple. So we have three tables. I have a users table, a profiles table, and then also a posts table. The user has a one-to-one relationship with the profile table. So one user can have one profile. And then I have a one-to-many relationship with my posts table because one user can have multiple posts. And now let's look at the two schemas. On the right side, you have Drizzle. On the left side, I have Prisma. What's the biggest difference? As mentioned, abstraction. Prisma is a huge abstraction over standard SQL. If we look at the schema, is there anything that's similar to SQL right here? No, there's nothing that's similar. We have a model, not a table. Then we have this int, at ID, at default, at unique. Where's my varchar? Where's my timestamp? This isn't SQL. But now let's look at Drizzle. So here we have again the same schema but created with Drizzle. And here you will now see PG table, serial, primary key, integer, references, then we have this relations function, okay, then varchar, length 256. Drizzle is very similar to SQL, and that's because there's a very small abstraction layer over standard SQL. Sure, you still write TypeScript, but it's still kinda SQL. And since I already mentioned TypeScript, there's one thing which you should know. Drizzle uses standard TypeScript. You have a schema.ts file, and inside of here you create your schema. But Prisma is a bit different actually, because Prisma has its own file, so schema.prisma. Prisma has its own DSL, domain-specific language. It's like its own programming language. And this also means that Prisma right now has a quite big engine in the background which takes your code and then generates the types and SQL statements and stuff like that. Currently this is a Rust engine, but they are rewriting it to TypeScript to make everything faster and nicer. If we now summarize it, what can we say? Well, Prisma is a huge abstraction. Drizzle is a small abstraction. Prisma created its own language. Drizzle chose TypeScript. Drizzle is faster, Prisma is slower. These are just the facts, at least right now when I'm recording this video. And now let's talk about a few things which I like and don't like. Let's start with relations. So right here I have a one-to-many relationship. So my user has a one-to-many relationship with the post table. So if you now look at the relation, how do I define the relation? Well, right here in my user model, which is a table, I have my posts and this equals to my post table and I append this array symbol. With this, I create my one-to-many relationship. And then in my post table, I have my foreign key, my author ID. That's all. That's how I create relations. If I go to Drizzle, you'll see, here I have my user table, users, but in the table itself, in this code, there's no relation. And that's because there's a separate function, user relations. Then we have this posts, many posts. So with this, I create my one-to-many relationship. And if I go to my post table, you will see right here again, okay, I have my author ID, this references my user ID, so this is my foreign key, and then we have our post relations function, and here I reference or I relate to my user table. This is a one-to-one relationship. Here I have my fields, my references. As you see, it's a bit more complicated and there's way more code that you have to write. Sure, once you understand it, it's quite easy to write everything, but it takes more time and it's more complicated. And also, since at the end of the day Prisma has its own domain-specific language, you can also use the extension, which is called Prisma. And this offers syntax highlighting, formatting, and auto-completion. I can show it to you. I will delete my relation right now. And now I want to again create a one-to-many relationship with my posts. So in the user model table, I can just say, hey, posts, and this will be equal to my post model, and let's append the array symbol. If I now click on Command S, we just generated our relation. So if I go again to the post model, right here I have my author ID somewhere or my user ID. So as you see, it's super easy to create relations and it's faster. And this is one thing which I realized when working with these two ORMs. Prisma has a very good developer experience. They pretty much put developer experience over everything. Drizzle is way more low level, so you have to really dig into the code, understand SQL, create these functions. There's no extension which auto-generates everything for you, so that's a huge difference. Also, one thing which I have to mention is that Drizzle is currently working on a new Relations API version 2. Right now it's still in development, but from what I saw, it looks quite promising. Let's now talk about another point, and that's the general ORM setup. So setting up Prisma is super simple. You install two dependencies. You install Prisma client and then the Prisma development dependency, and then in your terminal you run pnpm dlx prisma init. And with that, Prisma will generate this Prisma folder with the schema file. And then I can already get started with creating my schema, and then I can create my migrations and stuff like that. With Drizzle, it's similar but a bit more complicated. So first of all, again, I install two packages, Drizzle ORM and Drizzle Kit, which is a development dependency. Right here, I don't have a command like pnpm dlx Drizzle Kit init. No, I have to set it up manually. This means, for example, I have to create the drizzle.config file, create all of the configuration. Then I have, for example, a DB folder. Inside of here, I set up my database connection in general, and then I create my schema file. So as you see, setting up the ORM works, it's fine. It takes more time. The developer experience isn't as great because there's no auto-generation magic, but it's fine. In my opinion, Prisma does it better, but it also abstracts a lot of things for you, which some people might not enjoy. Let's now look at how you query data with the two ORMs. So here I'm again in the Prisma example, and I created, for example, this data folder. So here we have this get user function. So in this query, I just get one singular user. So the query itself or the API is very simple. As you see, constant user equals equals to await prisma.user.findUnique, and then I say, hey, I want to find the user where the ID matches the ID which I provide. I want to select the ID, full name, email, and then right here from my related table profile, I want to select the bio. Super simple API, not groundbreaking, let's be honest. Then I also have the get users function, again, same thing, prisma.user.findMany. I want to find many users. I select all of my info, I order by the created at timestamp, and I return my data. Let's look at Drizzle, because Drizzle is a bit more interesting, to be honest with you. There's not only one way to query your data, but there are two ways to query your data. So first of all, you have the query API, and the query API is very, very similar to Prisma, because you again have this dbQuery.post.findFirst. This is very similar to findUnique. Then I want to find a post where my ID matches my post ID, and then I select all of my properties right here and I return them. But as mentioned, there are two ways to query data. So if I go to my get user function, you'll see, this looks kinda different, but it also looks kinda similar to SQL. Constant user equals to await db select from users left join where eq users ID ID. If you have ever worked with SQL, then this will be super similar, because this is pretty much SQL right here. You have your select method, you have your from method, left join, this is SQL specific, and then we have our where statement. Let me again open for you standard SQL, select from where. Again right here, select XYZ from XYZ where XYZ. Pew! And the nice thing is, we get type safety. So if I misspell, for example, right here, full name, we have our errors. And that's the reason why we use ORMs. So right here, I opened for you both queries, both identical queries. One is with Prisma, one is with Drizzle. Which one do you prefer? I don't know. Which one do I prefer? To be honest with you, I prefer Drizzle. Why is that? First of all, I like this very small abstraction over raw SQL. Secondly, Drizzle is better. Why is it better? Well, Drizzle guarantees that this will export to only one SQL statement. So it will pretty much export to this. Prisma, on the other hand, does not guarantee one statement. If the engine decides that it needs 3 statements, then it will create 3 statements. This means you will have more load, it will take more time to get your data, and the performance will be worse. And that's something that I don't want. So honestly, I prefer Drizzle, but Prisma is fine. I used it for many years. It was always fast enough, but never the fastest. Let's now also look at mutations. This is also super important. So again, on the left side, we have Prisma, and as you see, it's almost the same to the query API. Prisma.user.create. Pass your data, return it, voila. Update user. Prisma.user.update, where the ID matches the ID. Here I pass my data, voila, we are finished. Super, super simple. Let's look at the Drizzle example and you'll see, damn, we have way more code. db transaction await tx insert values returning, then right here tx insert, then we return our data, and db.update.set.where eq. This is very similar to SQL, and this also means you write way more code. Is this a bad thing? No. Does it take more time? Yes. Is this a worse developer experience? In my opinion, yes. But do I enjoy it? Kinda, yeah. Look, I could now go on for hours and hours and talk about the query API and which one I prefer and stuff like that. But I think you understand my base message. The whole difference lies in the abstraction. Prisma tried to abstract SQL as much as possible. Drizzle stayed true to their nature, to SQL. Also, one thing which I forgot to mention is that Drizzle only works with SQL databases. If you want to use MongoDB, it won't work. Prisma, on the other hand, also works with no SQL databases. And that's also probably the reason why we have such a big abstraction. But you know what? Let's now maybe also look at migrations. So I will be honest with you. I'm someone who does not create migrations. No. call the police. So I'm someone, I just open my terminal and then inside of here I just write pnpm dlx prisma db push. This means I just push my schema directly to my database. I don't create migrations. But if you are someone who creates migrations, then Prisma will be a better choice. Because even though I don't create migrations, I read that Drizzle is not or does not play very well with migrations. Or in other words, when you want to roll back, Drizzle still isn't version 1. It's about 75% complete. Let's quickly check documentation. Yes, 75% until version 1. And that's also why certain things are still not perfect, but they are, in most cases, good enough. Let's now also maybe talk about the documentation itself. So I'm someone who likes good documentation, who doesn't, right? And the thing is, I don't find the documentation for Drizzle or Prisma to be perfect. Now, I will be honest with you, I prefer the Drizzle documentation over the Prisma documentation. I find the Prisma documentation to be kinda, you could say, complicated, if this makes sense. Look at the sidebar. What the hell is that? There's so many things, I don't know where to start. If you go to the Drizzle documentation, sure, it isn't perfect, but at least I find everything that I need to find, and that's quite important. And since we are already talking about documentation, let's maybe quickly look again at performance, because Drizzle has this nice performance chart. And as you see, yeah, Drizzle is faster, average latency of 30 milliseconds compared to 425 milliseconds. The same thing is true for requests per second. Average CPU load is lower. And now let's come to the most important question of this video, and that's, is a burger better than a hot dog? No, I'm joking. Is Prisma, or in other words, is Drizzle better than Prisma? Here's the answer. No, but it's also not worse. What do I mean with that? Well, here's a little, I don't know how you call it, let's call it a diagram. And here you see, first of all, Prisma has a better developer experience. It's easier to get started with Prisma, also since you don't need SQL knowledge. Secondly, it's very easy to set up because they have this nice CLI command in it which already sets up everything for you automatically. Thirdly, you don't need SQL knowledge. So if you are a new developer who still hasn't learned SQL, which you should, then it's very easy to get started working with Prisma. What are the bad points? Well, we have a huge abstraction over standard SQL. Again, this is a good and bad thing at the same time. Since Prisma abstracts everything for you, you don't really know what is run in the background. Or in other words, how it converts your TypeScript Prisma code into raw SQL statements. Secondly, it's not as performant because you have this Rust engine which converts your code into SQL, and it does not guarantee one SQL statement, but it can also create multiple statements, which will make your whole application slower. Let's now also look at Drizzle. So what have we learned in this video? Well, Drizzle is super performant. It's more performant than Prisma, but of course it's still slower than raw SQL. Also, Drizzle is the thin abstraction over standard SQL, as you saw. If I again open my schema, you'll see, yeah, we have our primary key, we have our varchar, unique, not null. It's very SQL specific. Also, we have more freedom. Why do we have more freedom? If I open my data access layer, there are two ways to query data. Either using the query API, which is also a quite big abstraction over standard SQL. And then we also have our, you could say, SQL-like query API. So we have our select method, from method, left join, where what are the bad points or the bad things about Drizzle? Well, first of all, it's relatively low level. This isn't a bad thing per se, but it's still more low level than Prisma. You have to know SQL to fully use Drizzle. If you don't know SQL, then good luck. Also, you have worse developer experience. This does not mean that it's bad. It isn't. It's very good, but it isn't the same as with Prisma. If I would have to rank it, then Prisma would be A+ and Drizzle would be B+. So not perfect, but very, very good. So when will would I use Prisma and when would I use Drizzle? This is a very good question. So I would choose Prisma whenever I work with a lot of newer developers. Also, I would choose Prisma if I don't care too much about performance. Because let's be honest, Prisma is not slow, it's fast, and they even doubled their speed in the last few months. Nevertheless, it's still slower than Drizzle. Also, if I have limited to no SQL knowledge, then Drizzle won't be my best bet. That's why I would choose Prisma. Also, if developer experience is super important, then Prisma is my best bet because you can't really top the developer experience that Prisma provides. What about Drizzle? When would I choose Drizzle? Well, first of all, I would choose Drizzle if I have good SQL knowledge. Secondly, if I care about performance, and I'm someone who cares about performance, so Drizzle is something which is very appealing to me. Also, Drizzle is a good choice for you if developer experience is important to you, but not the top priority, because Drizzle has good developer experience, but not the best. And also, if you're working with experienced developers, if your developers are not experienced and don't know SQL, then you should not choose Drizzle. And also, Drizzle is still a better product. If you're fine with better products, then you should probably choose Drizzle. But if you want to get a product which is already fully baked out where everything works, then Prisma is the better bet. So what can we say? Is there a better or a worse ORM? No, there are only ORMs with pros and cons. I for myself decided that I will continue working with Drizzle. I will still use Prisma here and there, and maybe my opinions will also change in the future. But right now I enjoy Drizzle a lot, I know SQL, and I really care about performance currently, and that's why I will continue working with Drizzle. What do you think? What do you prefer? Let me know in the comments. I'm actually quite interested to know your thoughts on this whole topic. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me and my heart, so please do it. And now enjoy your day and bye.